The nutritional value there is abysmal. Having potatoes in a fried form count as a vegetable for these kids is not ideal. That's, I can't even, it makes me want to throw up. I just can't believe that is what we're saying is okay to give a child. I've watched my elementary students, because I'm setting up in the morning in our garden space to cook this beautiful, whatever, vegetable inspired soup or pasta or whatever they might be creating from the garden. I don't watch them go into the cafeteria and come out with chocolate donuts as their breakfast food. That's what's allowed to be given out as breakfast food. I just want to hit the roof. I just don't understand how we're not all up in arms about this. We're developing kids who are going to be obese and have diabetes from a very young age just because this is all it's normal, so it's comfortable, and that's what gets normalized and what they'll continue to develop and have habits around.
Welcome to the Real Organic Podcast. I'm Linley Dixon, co-director of the Real Organic Project. We're a grassroots, farmer-led movement with an add-on organic food label to distinguish organic crops grown in healthy soils and organic livestock raised on well-managed pasture, all without synthetic fertilizers and toxic chemicals. You just heard from Chef Eliza Daly, 2020 champion of the Food Network show Chopped. She's a restaurant owner and most recently a food educator, working to be sure that kids in our school systems have a better understanding around where food comes from and how to prepare it. Dave Chapman met with Eliza last winter in California, and it's clear from their conversation that Eliza is very passionate about her path and the need to teach anyone and everyone about how to grow and prepare food for those you love.
Welcome to the Real Organic Podcast. I'm very pleased to be talking with Eliza Daly today. Eliza, thank you for taking this time. Eliza is a chef and an educator, and you famously won a Beard Award that I'll let you talk about, James Beard Award, and also you won Chopped, right? which is like a huge thing, right? So I know James Beard Award is a huger thing, but you know, people watch Chopped, so good. Yeah. So hi. Could you tell me a little bit about your food story?
Sure. I think my food story is a little bit different, but also very much the same as a lot of chefs that I've gotten the good pleasure of knowing. And food in my family was always a really big deal. When I was growing up, my dad, he's an army guy, very stoic man, doesn't have a lot to say, but when he would cook, that was kind of his love language. So for me, food became this kind of artful way of saying that you care, and I grew up around that. We grew up in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, where a lot of different versions of food were happening. So my dad came from farm country. He was a former Mennonite, turned English. And so I think he valued good farm-grown food because that's what he knew, that's what he grew up around. But, we grew up in kind of like a middle-class family. We couldn't afford fancy meals all the time, and my dad would cook for us one night a week, and it was just magical. Like, he would create these unbelievably intricate, beautiful dishes that was like Saturday night feasting. And I don't think I valued it quite enough when I was a kid, but looking back and seeing all the care of the preparation, there was something there that really sparked my curiosity. And getting to help him was the greatest honor in the household, was getting to create these dinners together. With my mom, she grew up with a very boisterous Italian family, and so we would make pasta together. Once a year for Easter, we would make this beautiful ravioli dish. I remember looking forward to, just the smell of pasta can bring me home, because there's something magical about being all together, being loud, giggling, and creating this amazing food together. So I think just growing up in a family where food was really important and valued kind of changed my perspective on what food could be. But I never set out to be a chef. I set out to be some sort of actress on a stage, and was studying musical theater and decided to go study abroad in England and learn about Shakespeare. And that was the very first time that I actually got to cook for myself, and living abroad by myself with these lovely flatmates who sort of took me under their wing and decided everybody would teach me one, like the new white girl would teach her one new thing. And so my Italian flatmate taught me how to make tiramisu, and my Australian flatmate taught me how to make jam. My Welsh flatmate taught me how to make a roast, and everybody kind of like took turns giving me a little bit of something. And fortunately, we lived right next door to Borough Market, so that was where I spent as much time when I wasn't studying as possible. I was in that market talking to these like cheese farmers and these incredible, just these like market experts in England of all places. And that's kind of what sparked it for me. I got to cook for myself for the first time. I got to feel the empowerment of what that would be like to actually make food all by myself, for my flatmates. And that was kind of it for me. I fell into food world right after that. I started working at the Rachel Ray Show in New York City while I was still in college. When I graduated, I moved to New York, still kind of like hanging on to the actor's stream. Very quickly became a bartender. So all I would find myself doing would be like sneaking to the back of the restaurants I was working in as a bartender and hanging out with the chef and like making friends with the chef and asking if I could watch or help out on my day off. And that just sort of exploded. So I think it was about 6 months after moving to New York, I decided I'd become a culinary student. I had been taking these acting courses and was just not getting anywhere with any auditions. I was getting hugely frustrated with like what I thought art should be, and I decided I needed to go to culinary school. I had actually pitched an idea to somebody I met at one of the bars I worked at, that there should be some sort of college-centered food cooking show on the Food Network, and I had put together this whole ridiculous schematic of what this show could look like. And when I pitched it, he asked me if I actually knew how to cook. And when I said no, he said I needed to get some skill sets. So I started culinary school right after that. And then it all kind of fell into this decade-long pursuit of learning different styles of cuisine. So after I graduated culinary school, I worked in every restaurant or catering gig that would hire me. I decided I needed to learn as fast as possible, so in the back of my head, so I could pass on the information. I think that's the whole reason I was trying so rapidly to absorb as much as I could from every chef that I met, so that I could eventually pass it on. And
when you say pass it on, you were already thinking that you wanted to somehow be a food educator?
Yeah, I think it's ridiculous that I went to culinary school and that was the first time somebody taught me how to pick up a knife. Like this skill set that I found so empowering when I was studying abroad should be part of the everyday education we give to anybody, I think, in this country. But I was shocked that I knew so little. And the more I learned how little I knew. And that's why food was so impressive to me. It was something that could keep me always curious. It could keep me always creating, because I can never learn it all. That's what makes it so interesting. But I also think that these skill sets are just simple muscle memory that can be built in anyone. I truly believe that anyone can cook, because I learned how to do it, and if I can learn how to do it, anybody can learn how to do it. But I think that something in me was still trying to get to that teacher part of me, trying to figure out new ways to do things so that I could share them. Because I would go to culinary school and immediately come home and start cooking more, just to see if I could get it faster or better, and then share with my roommates. And living in New York, you have 45 roommates at a time, so there's a lot of people to feed. Practice on. So once I graduated culinary school, I started working my first restaurant. I was working in three catering companies. And I applied for this James Beard Award competition. And it was complete fluke. I had no idea what I was doing or what I signed up for, but I ended up winning this competition, and it was called the Women in Culinary Leadership program. And that was basically, at that time, this was in 2012, 3% of the executive chefs in our country were women. And so they were trying really hard to push more females into the limelight and get them into more of these like management positions. And so I won this really amazing award and got to move to Chicago. And I got to cook Indian food for a whole year. And learn the ins and outs of running a restaurant kind of from the top down. I worked as the sous chef, I worked as the manager, I worked as the front of house, I worked as the back of house. There were nights when I would sometimes fly from the tables taking orders back into the kitchen, prepare the food that they had just requested, and then bring it back out again. So it was an interesting experience. And then from there, I just had more experience learning that I love teaching. So I was the only one patient enough to train the new cooks coming into the restaurant at that time. And I learned I really loved it. I loved being able to like share and coach and try to get somebody more in touch with their hands. And so after that, Chicago was kind of like my playing field. I got to play in Indian food. I got to work at a nonprofit restaurant group that served homeless, trying to get more people working on the line who were not well off, because the food industry is a place where a lot of people who may not necessarily have, an amazing skill set can go. The food industry is kind of a place where a lot of different people collect. So that was pretty awesome. I got to work in that restaurant for a year, making Creole food, teaching people anywhere from age 19 up through 55 how to become a line cook or a prep cook. That was hard work, but I also started seeing the discrepancy, the differences in people's backgrounds and their food knowledge, and how I had grown up, thankfully in farm country. I knew what a tomato looked like. I knew what a cucumber looked like. But I remember sending one of these line cooks I was training to the pantry to grab a watermelon, and they didn't know what it looked like. They came back and asked, "It's not the one that's in the soda, right? I'm looking for a watermelon?" And I had to actually physically train these adults what our fresh food was. That was mind-blowing to me. And I think I started to put together some more pieces of what and how some education had kind of failed. This was still in Chicago. This is in Southside Chicago, difficult part of town. And so from there, I felt like I just needed to teach complete full-time and give in to teaching the next generation. So I started working at a children's culinary school. I started my own catering company. I started my own aquaponic farming company because I felt like students needed to actually see food growing. And so we were building these tabletop, this is so ridiculous, goldfish aquaponic systems so the kids could see kale growing or could see basil growing. And we hit a lot of roadblocks with that. The FDA wouldn't allow students to eat the food that they were growing. And so they could watch it grow, but they couldn't taste it. So a lot more came up for me, understanding how and what needed to be passed on in education. And that's when I got the call to move to San Francisco and take over a restaurant there. So I put back on my chef coat and started running an Italian restaurant in San Francisco. And that was amazing, going back to my Italian roots, getting to cook really beautiful Italian food with an amazing team. But I still started missing the teaching component. And so I started organizing with another nonprofit in San Francisco, cooking classes for kids right out of the restaurant. My poor servers were mortified when I started doing that. There was flour in every part of the dining room. But I started to realize that I couldn't be at home just in a restaurant. I needed to continue to teach. So I worked with another children and adults culinary school in San Francisco, and that's when pandemic hit. So we moved to San Diego, and now I just craft as many school programs as possible around food and culinary training in a lot of ways.
So yeah, tell me, what are you trying to teach the kids? I mean, obviously to know what a watermelon looks like, right?
Great question.
Right, but
it's a great question.
What do the kids come in? I mean, are you just trying to teach them how to make a meal?
We started there. When I started teaching, especially with younger students, so I run elementary, middle school, high school, and now community college level classes. And when I'm teaching them how to cook, I think the first step is, much like Alice Waters with this Montessori style of teaching, is using our senses and getting in touch with our five senses. What does that look like? What does a tomato growing on the vine smell like, taste like? What colors does it have? How does it suggest that I should pick it right now? And what could it be changed into? How could we creatively make this something else? What does it feel like? So we use a lot of the five senses kind of in the beginning with especially younger children. I run a garden program at an elementary school. We harvest out of the garden. They get to cook for themselves what they've harvested. That's rad. But it's so much more than that to me. And I tell all of my students that I don't need any of them to become Gordon Ramsay. I don't need them to be celebrity chefs, but I need them to be empowered with food knowledge. I need them to be able to share this with their families, because we're in this weird place right now where my generation, the generation ahead of me, my parents' generation, we lost something along the line. And getting in touch with our kitchens, it suddenly became, I'm not sure if it became like less cool to be in the kitchen, or if it became a little bit just not, it wasn't a priority. Making food became this thing where it had to be fast, it had to be completely available all the time, and we sort of lost the joy of cooking. I think we also really lost the importance of cooking and the value you can have in not just using your two hands, but being able to choose what you're feeding yourself, your family, the nutritional value that's behind all of that. It became so much easier, I guess, just to grab food on the go. Fast food became kind of the norm. And a lot of the students I work with are at-risk youth. They're kids who have grown up in either a food desert or grown up around food insecurity. And so the way food is observed and understood is just very, very different, I think, especially than I grew up around in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, where you're surrounded by farm country, you're surrounded by farmers who are getting to know the land and, different styles of cuisine. So I think for me, I'm trying in some wild way, my goal is a domino effect. I'm hoping that if I can pass on to a child, they can pass it on to their family and bring the value of cooking together home. Some of the training that I run is for job training, because for these at-risk youth I work with in high schools, they don't have a clear path of what their career could look like. And food industry work is something they not only have a knack for, but they also could easily get involved with as, the start of their career path. California is actually the #1 state, this is ridiculous to me, the #1 state that holds the most youth who are homeless. So we messed up somewhere. But I also think that this food knowledge is one that is very, very empowering to kids who are still kind of figuring out how their brains work, how their hands work. This knowledge unlocks a lot more than just getting a good meal on the table. It helps them to get in touch with their taste, their sense of smell, their visceral learning. So it does so much more than just gives them an awesome meal. it empowers them. It gives them something to be proud of. It gives them a creative outlet. So to me, I mean, this training is a lot of things. It's a lot of therapy for some students. In some cases, with some of the elementary students I serve, those are kids who didn't get breakfast at home, so it might be one wholesome meal they'll get that day. It's way bigger than just cooking. It's so much broader. I have a very great fear that if chefs like me, chefs who have gone through culinary school don't pass on this knowledge, I'm very scared that nobody will, because of the dramatic cuts we've seen in school budgeting for providing things like nutritional education. We used to call it home ec when I was in high school, but that doesn't exist. It rarely exists in schools anymore. So I think it's immeasurable value that these students get from learning about food, getting in touch with food, where it comes from, how they can use it, how they can create it, how they can nourish themselves with it. And I'm very scared. I really genuinely have a fear every day when I wake up. If I don't do this, who will? I think we have to look to these community leaders to do it. Those are our best friends. Come here, Bubs. Thanks, babe. They agree too. I mean, I'm really getting support here. I'm serious though. The whole reason I took the leap out of restaurant world is just because I feel like as experts in our field, chefs have to be the ones to pass on this knowledge. And if we don't, we're gonna be SOL.
You know, there's an interesting thing, and certainly many people observe it, which is these phenomenal chefs, people who have this high art of cooking, are often only able to cook for people of great means. It's who can afford to go and eat at these amazing restaurants, and I've eaten at some of these amazing restaurants, usually as a guest.
Yeah.
And but you know, and it's remarkable, and honestly, many Americans eat the majority of their meals in fast food restaurants, and I would save all of my restaurant budget and go to one meal a year to just have something that is maybe changes your mind a little bit about everything. But it is a conundrum of how do we take this kind of wonderful, brilliant thing that used to be part of home life. It used to be that you learn how to cook at home, and you cooked for your family, and that doesn't really happen as much anymore.
The value of that has disappeared, and I guess I think I might be honestly too young to pinpoint why that happened, because I know it happened a generation before mine. Since I didn't grow up, in the kitchen learning how to do all of the, I think, the important things. A lot of my students tell me their grandmothers are their ones teaching them how to cook, which is awesome, beautiful. But I wonder, the why of that is interesting to me. I'm sure it's different for different demographics, but why it became so much less valuable to use our hands, why it's not valued in schools, why aren't we learning how to do learning about these soft skills, learning about how to use our hands. I don't know where that went out the window, but I definitely think we did a disservice to the next generation in thinking that arithmetic is important, but learning how to feed yourself isn't. That's crazy. That's crazy. We have to figure out how to nourish ourselves in some way, hopefully do it deliciously, but we have to figure out how to nourish ourselves in some way. And we're not equipping students with the tools they need to survive. Like, how did I leave college and only know how to cook scrambled eggs? That's bonkers. I should not be going into adulthood not being able to feed myself well. I hardly even knew what food could look like until I started culinary school. My food curiosity had always been very, vast. But I grew up in Amish country, Pennsylvania, where there aren't a whole lot of Japanese or Thai restaurants. So, you know, I have found that when you get kids interested in using their hands and give them choices about what it is they're making and creating, they are so much more willing to explore. Their curiosity gets perked just that quickly, just in offering them an option to garnish with a little bit of basil or parsley. You make a choice. And then they, you know, the next time around feel a little bit more brave about what it is they're eating and trying. So I don't know, man. I don't know the exact way to fix this. I just know I have to do something. I can do a part of fixing it. I would love to see every single school providing culinary education, and not just to become a chef, to become a human, to become an adult who's equipped to take on the world, because you have to know how to buy groceries and budget, and you have to know how to pick up a skillet and create something for yourself. It doesn't have to be hard, but it has to be accessible. And I think that education is really, really important. I believe we've really failed in giving the next generation these essential tools to feed themselves well, eat with the seasons, create something really beautiful on their own.
You know, I also grew up in Lancaster County,
I
Pennsylvania.
know, that's why we're soulmates.
I know. And I was the generation where it probably happened.
What happened?
Yeah, what
did we do?
I actually remember the malls being built. When I was born, McDonald's didn't exist, right? It didn't exist. It hadn't been born yet. Walmart, you know, hadn't been born yet when I was born. And in my lifetime, it has gone from first one and then two stores to being the biggest food purveyor in the world, right? It is the biggest. And McDonald's has become, you know, the biggest restaurant chain in the world. Mm-hmm. So something happened in my lifetime. It's very quick. By the time you were born, it was already well underway, and you didn't see an alternative to it in the world around you. Mm. I think there was a lot of money to be made by doing that consolidation. Mm-hmm. And so I think there's a reason that people aren't being taught how to cook in school anymore, which they were when I was a kid. Mm-hmm. There was home ec class, there was also shop class, mm-hmm. and you would learn how to make stuff. Mm-hmm. I'm guessing that the reasons were economic. Mm-hmm. And that goes both ways. Mm-hmm. There's a thing that said that people don't have time to cook anymore, and I'm trying to understand that, because there certainly were people with not much money when I was a kid, mm-hmm. so they also didn't have time, and yet they did cook. Mm-hmm. Do you have any thoughts about that? About why cooking, preparing food, has become so disrespected? You know, it seems that it's not valued. It used to be valued, yeah. And it is valued if you're in a white tablecloth restaurant.
Right.
It's like very valued, and chefs are cultural heroes.
It's so funny. I think two things happened, or at least maybe my understanding of it is that two things happened. We invented the Food Network, and chefs, I don't think until really Julia Child and Anthony Bourdain came along, the chefs weren't cool. I mean, they were honored, but they weren't cool, and they weren't these kind of like heroic badasses. Now it's an amazing thing to be able to sort of, you know, become a chef, and you wear that on your, like, you're tattooed up and you're ready to rock, and I love all of that. I think it's so cool, because forever being a chef is a hard job, and they should be lauded and honored. And I can tell you terrible stories about how difficult it is to work in a restaurant. There's a lot of glory there for sure, and a lot of gore, but I think something happened to the consumer watching chefs on a screen compete and create so much that it became this like dramatic break. We now think we can't achieve that. It's too glamorous, it's too wild, it's too Hollywood. Like, I don't know, we just can't. I, as just a normal person, can't possibly cook. That's what the chefs on TV do. I couldn't possibly do that. And so we've separated ourselves from the kitchen at a time when convenience is also kind of like king. So we're trying to also gain all this time back for ourselves. I'm a big believer that the time we put into our kitchen now actually gives you added years at the end of your life because you're making choices about nourishing your body. But that's another story. I think for me, I got, Wonder Bread might be the thing that ruined it all. Like having TV dinners might be the thing that changed it for us, because it was suddenly easier just to do it the fast way, the inexpensive way, and the value of convenience outweighed the value of nourishment and health even, maybe. I don't think it was that way for me growing up. I was lucky, and even on a small budget, we could create pretty tasty food, or in my mom's case, at least a casserole that she made. But I don't know. I think there's probably a lot working in tandem that created this idea that the kitchen was a scary place, and that making a mess wasn't okay, and convenience was all that we cared about. And in this like racing technology time, I see it a lot with the students I work with. Like, oh no, they'll cook in my class, and I'll ask them if they'll make it again at home. Like, do you think you'll create this again, like over the weekend? And, oh no, I don't have time. And something has to change to be able to get that switch to start to really value what it means to cook for yourself on so many levels. Not just being able to be creative, but taking care of yourself. Like, the practice of cooking can really be transformative in people's health, in their well-being, in mental sanity. There's so many different ways that food can be transformative, and I just can't believe we're not teaching any of it to the next generation. And that's where my fear stems from, is that if chefs don't pass on this knowledge, who's going to pass it on? Because now we're kind of the only like bastions who can carry this on, right? We're the only ones who have this expertise.
And respect. For now, yeah. Chefs are respect. So are farmers.
Yeah.
Farmers are also cultural icons and chefs. And when a farmer or a chef gets up, people actually tend to listen. Mm-hmm. We just have some kind of a platform, and I say we need to use that. We need to use the microphone that's been offered to us. People right now are outsourcing the preparation of food,
right,
to somebody else, someplace else.
Right. And I get it, because I have friends who do that. I totally can appreciate that, the difficulty, the fear that comes along with trying to learn the craft of cooking, which should be a part of our education growing up, not just in the home. I really believe in the school system. We need to be giving the next generation, because I missed the boat, but the next generation at least needs to be learning how to use their hands to be able to feed themselves healthfully. And that's gonna be the transforming factor that brings, I don't know, the next wave of what farms can look like, of what food can look like. And I can appreciate how difficult it is if you've never been shown or never understood how to cook. It's scary. It can be terrifying to, figure out what you're going to make for dinner for your 4-person household. But we've got to get value back into it so that things can change. If the, moderate consumer can make that change for our farmers, for our restaurateurs who are trying to create something beautiful. I mean, I know that food costs are outrageous and insane right now. And that makes it even more difficult for a small restaurateur or somebody trying to feed their family. Like, something's got to give. We've got to value this more.
Well, fast food expenses are pretty out of control too.
Yeah.
It's not like that's cheap anymore.
Right.
But
that
basic
we're hooked
food.
on it. It's
Yeah,
easy.
There's an addiction there.
Yeah.
There's a cultural addiction. We don't see the art of the possible. That's what you're doing, is creating an alternative. Let's turn for a minute to the, a lot of farmers listen to this podcast. So let's talk about the raw materials of cooking and the impact of that. We know a carrot is not a carrot. Potato is not a potato. They've tested this a gazillion ways in a gazillion years, and they've seen a steady decline in the nutritional value of basic raw foodstuffs over the last 40 years.
Yeah, again, because of convenience. We're trying to make so much to feed that. It's just,
Quicker, faster, cheaper.
Yeah.
But it's not really cheaper if it makes you sick, is it? So, I mean, those nutritional elements that are missing are important to us, important to our health. So I'm just curious
But they're not important to us, are they? Like, we're not making them important. It should be important, but we're not coaching it. We're not teaching that is valuable. That's crazy.
Yeah.
There's no other way to make it better unless we're actually passing on this knowledge, unless we're starting to value our health directly stems from what we eat, right? And we're not teaching that what we eat can come from something beautiful. We're learning, and I've watched it with my own students, we're learning that food comes from the grocery store. And apart from that, we don't know anything else about it, right? We don't know what's been done to it. We don't know what chemicals it's gotten rubbed all over it. We don't know, even getting my high school students to associate the animal with what we're cooking and getting them to understand what a chicken is before we've gotten it packaged at the grocery store, what eggs look like when they're fresh, and what a pig looks like on a pig farm. There's a gap there.
Huge gap. I heard Emmanuel Faber was quoting a study. I don't remember the details. It was something like 10% of Americans believed that chocolate milk came from brown cows. Staggering number. So, okay. And this is true for the Real Organic Project too. Our biggest challenge is actually educational. There actually are a lot of farmers who know how to grow real organic food.
Beautiful food.
And there are actually a lot of people, millions of people, who want to buy that food, but they aren't necessarily getting what they're trying to buy. But you're talking about one step removed of people for whom it doesn't necessarily occur to them that they could buy food and prepare dinner with that.
Right. I mean, I am a huge supporter of local farmers and support. As a community, I think it's our job to support the most local food that we can get. For the students I serve, we're just still trying to walk before we can run. We're just trying to get students engaged with what food is and looks like in its raw form when we grow it, when we purchase it from a farmer's market or a grocery store, and then how we can play with it and make it something delicious that they'll enjoy. So I think the entire organic movement could be, and the slow food movement, and I feel like we could completely influence that with this next generation just by getting them engaged and interested in where their food comes from, and not just interested, valuing what food is, what a meal is, and what that should look like, not just what they're, I could get on a whole platform on the fight I've had with the FDA about what shows up in school lunches, and we're not really doing a good job of teaching kids what healthy food looks like, or, you know, so it's tricky business. And I really think the only thing that is going to make a difference is education. And it's a very difficult thing to do with so many people in our country facing food insecurity. I think it's something like 45 million people in our country face food insecurity, meaning they're not even able to afford food for their family. Like, we've got to do something to change it. It's just, I really think it has to start with the educational systems, primarily public education, because students at affluent schools in affluent families are going to grow up naturally around different styles of cuisine and naturally kind of have that food curiosity. That's what we're seeing, is that that we have to have more money to be able to afford this organic lifestyle. That's the conception right now. And we're not teaching that if we eat seasonally, if we eat what's already in season, we could afford some of these foods. We live in California, where there's any number of foods available in the correct season. But my students don't recognize, they don't know, they can't recognize it unless I've shown them, here's what a kumquat looks like, and here's the tree it grew off of. They've never tried it before. California students! That's why I'm mad. That's why I'm frustrated. I don't know who else can teach this, but I really believe that community members should be engaged in creating better learning for the next generation. I'm a full believer that there should be a chef at every school teaching how to make food properly. There should be a farmer at every school teaching how to grow properly. There should be health experts at every school. You know, the doctor should come in and share what nutrition looks like. I think that should be the way of our educational system's growth. But until we get there, I'm just gonna have to keep hoping that students pass on this knowledge to their families.
I want to come back, but I want to take one break. And I want you to describe, because you have described it to me, the experience of being on Chopped, this TV show for people who don't know what that is.
Yeah.
And it's a competition. And you know, the competition of the judges vote, I think it's 3 people who are in for every round, 4 people in for every round. And, you know, by the end they pick a winner. And it's a very engaging and entertaining thing. And it takes, how long is the show?
The show, when it's aired, is usually about 30 minutes.
30 minutes.
Film time was 16 or 17 hours.
Exactly. So could you, because it's pretty interesting, could you talk about what it's like for the 16 or 17 hours that it was being filmed, as opposed to the 30 minutes that we saw for great entertainment value?
Yeah, it is all entertaining, isn't it? That's another part of the separation. We see it as entertainment instead of something valuable. I auditioned for the Food Network's Chopped series for 2 reasons. Number one, because I went through the James Beard Foundation's Women in Culinary Leadership program. The Food Network started looking for more females to be on camera. There weren't enough ladies being represented as chefs. And so while I was running my restaurant in San Francisco, the Food Network kind of reached out directly, and so I got to audition and do the whole thing. And that was like a whole taping process done in San Francisco as our little audition tape. And then the producer said yes. I went to New York for a day, and starting at like 5 a.m. we were in the studio, and I actually did that show. My impetus was to do that just so I could be cool for my students. Like, I just wanted to be something that they could see as a real chef. Because until you make it on the screen, I don't think, for some reason here, I mean, isn't that silly? But that's sort of like the thing you have to do to be impressive. So I did it. And there's 4 competitors, and every course of a meal, there's another competitor who's kicked off. So I went through the 4 courses and was very grateful to win. But in between all of that, I mean, I think they do a really good job of writing a story around each one of us. There were moments when I felt like I was being fed lines that I was supposed to say out loud, like who I thought should be kicked off or who I thought the worst person was. And I just sort of decidedly refused. I could just said, like, please, I'm not going to repeat anything that you're saying. I think everybody's great and we're all doing a great job. But the 16 hours basically were getting the kitchen set up and beautiful in the studio space. We got to cook. Every single one of us made an abysmal mess that they had to clean up afterwards, which definitely took at least an hour. And then we would come on for the next round. And then in between each of the cooking challenges, we'd have to share with the judges what we created. They would eat our food. Usually it had gotten cold by that point because it took a full hour to get through all of the criticism. We'd be ushered off to a green room, come back and do it all over again. So yeah, I think it was a wild ride. I had a great time. I had a really wonderful group of chefs I got to cook with and learn from. I was the youngest by far, and just really got to enjoy hanging out with some other cool chefs from all over the country. And I think I did a little bit of preparation for myself because I know myself under pressure and I have to feel like I've prepared in order to do well. So I felt like I studied different ingredients and decided if I saw mushrooms, then I would definitely make this dish, which meant this style of cuisine. And I'm lucky enough to have a lot of weird stuff to pull from. I had Indian food and Mexican food and Thai food, and I've worked in all of these different styles of cuisines. So I had to focus my brain a little bit on what would be created if I saw XYZ, so I didn't go all over the map. But yeah, it was great. And the chef, Manit, who was one of the judges, she was the former executive chef of the restaurant I took over through the James Beard Foundation when I did my Women in Culinary Leadership program. She ran the Indian restaurant I would then enter into after she had left. So the whole thing got kicked off with me cooking one of her dishes for her, which really could have gone one of 2 ways. It could have been a terrible idea, but thankfully it worked in my favor. And yeah, I think just like with anything, if you can tell a story about a dish, if you have a story behind it, then there's a little bit of magic there. And that's what I did. Yeah. It's a wild day, but it was a lot of fun.
Well, it was an exciting 30 minutes to watch it, and it was. And I would just like to tell everyone, you were like the only one of the 3 finalists who didn't cut herself with a knife.
I know.
As you're flying along.
I'll never get over that. Everybody was giving me bad, criticism about my knife skills, but I'm the only one who kept all my digits attached. So.
I know. I know. Okay. So tell me a story about if you were, the ruler of the universe, and you saw that with the proper resources, you could change the food system, what would you do?
Oh my goodness, there's so much work to be done. Globally? Do I have global control? Or just here?
Well, I was going to start with the U.S., but if you'd like to jump to planetary, that's good.
Let's start with the U.S. I think the most important thing that we can honestly do is start valuing food and culinary education at every level of education. Every public school is required to have nutrition education. but that does not amount to any sort of skill set with a tangible result. There's no way to test the students' learning on how healthfully they eat. They have to physically be shown how to start. You know, we have to be giving the next generation a semblance of an idea of how to actually create the food we're trying to teach them is nutritious. And I think that it's going to start with that, and it will gradually progress to the next generation demanding higher quality produce and more nutritious produce, healthier cattle that we are eating. I think it's a small drop in the water, but it's going to be transformative if we can just start empowering the next generation with smart food choices. And what does that mean? There's so many different varying ideas of what that means, but what will nourish my body most is going to be, I think, as we already have talked about, what's growing seasonally and what's growing well for farmers. So things that are grown with care and packed full of nutrients. I think it's like you said already, there's foods that are grown well, and then there's foods that are grown for vast quantities. So the only way that the system can change is if there's demand for it. And we can't get a demand for it until we start putting value into it. And the only way we'll get value from any of that is by coaching the next generation about what that looks like. Even just opening their eyes to some of this is amazing. I remember doing a high school Q&A at my alma mater, my high school back in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. And it was the first time, I think every single one of the students had seen tofu. Like, they had no idea what it was or why they were eating this weird spongy thing when I gave them miso soup. Like, I thought that was not a novelty, but that it just, if I could change any of it, it would just be to start enacting at a federal level food courses in every single school. And I think part of that may even help with some of these food deserts that we see in all over our country, and these kids who are really struggling because of their lack of delicious food at home. We could kind of kill two birds with one stone. They could be cooking a nutritious meal for themselves, and that's free lunch. You know, we could be giving them food that was not just brown, full of nutrients, and they could be learning how to do it themselves. But there has to be a value there. There has to be a normalcy about that, and then a demand for that to change anything, I think.
Yeah.
I don't know what you're seeing on your lines with running all of these farms. The demand right now is coming from, I think, people who are very well off, people who can afford to have all these amazing flavor profiles and want only the highest quality, and people who are educated enough to know what the value is of really nutritious, good food. And then the rest are just kind of falling by the wayside because they don't know any better. So until we invest in that education, I don't know what change will be made at large, right? Until it's valuable by everybody, it's just going to be this high commodity, beautiful thing that I'm lucky enough to enjoy, but my students definitely aren't. So I don't know. I'm going to have to become president. I don't know. I don't know what else. I don't know what else to do.
I think it might need to be queen. I'm not sure the president has the power.
True.
You know,
yeah.
Certainly the president has a lot of power, but it's interesting to think about, well, what would it take to make what you've suggested come true? Obviously, you start in your way, I start in my way. We're all in this grassroots way, and maybe the grass will spread. That's what roots do, and it becomes, you know, a field and then a savanna. But the enormity of the system that likes things the way they are is pretty powerful.
Well, and what we have in place is working, right? So at schools where the FDA allows so much amount of blue plastic to show up in the burger patties that are going on kids' cafeteria trays, like, I guess that's working because kids are getting free lunch, but the nutritional value there is abysmal. Having potatoes in a fried form count as a vegetable for these kids is not ideal. That's, I can't even, it makes me want to throw up. I just can't believe that is what we're saying is okay to give a child. I've watched my elementary students, because I'm setting up in the morning in our garden space to cook this beautiful, whatever, vegetable inspired soup or pasta or whatever they might be creating from the garden. I don't watch them go into the cafeteria and come out with chocolate donuts as their breakfast food. That's what's allowed to be given out as breakfast food. I just want to hit the roof. I just don't understand how we're not all up in arms about this. We're developing kids who are going to be obese and have diabetes from a very young age just because this is all it's normal, so it's comfortable, and that's what gets normalized and what they'll continue to develop and have habits around.
Yeah. We create these new cultural norms that are very destructive, but they become a norm, and so
it's comfortable.
It's what we know, and in fact, it's even where we go for comfort.
Yeah.
It's when we feel anxious, we go get the chocolate donut if that's what we know. Yeah. It
is so disappointing to me that we put kids through that. I don't know how we can all stand by and let that happen. Giving malnutrition as the checkbox of everything's okay. Like, I'm sweating. I'm so angry about it all. I'm so upset. And I don't even have children yet. God, like, help me when that happens, because I am just going to unleash a fury. But I just am so frustrated with the values that we're giving the educational system. Like, I don't know. I cannot believe that every parent isn't up in arms, but they also weren't granted the gift of knowledge that I think I was when I paid for culinary school. So we got to fix it somehow.
Yeah. All right,
no more
Eliza.
Doom and gloom, Dave.
No.
How can we do it? I'll tell you.
Yeah.
Chefs can start passing on this knowledge. I really think that there's a special thing happening here. What I'm working on is getting my students involved with local restaurants. And so I take them on field trips and they get to see how cool it is to be a chef on the line at a sushi restaurant run by one of my very dear friends, who also happens to have a parking lot he turned into a garden that he's harvesting from to make this restaurant incredible. And getting these like local community members involved in the educational system, people who are experts in this field, involved in getting kids excited about it, is going to make all the difference. And it's going to ultimately support that local restaurant too. Those kids are going to go back and be like, this is where I went for that field trip, you know? We could be doing that at markets, at farms. I think that's the way of the future. If I had my queendom, and I would make our educational system completely transformed and start valuing, the local community, upholding it to higher standards than what we do now. All right.
Eliza, thank you so much. It's time to go make some pizza. I have been fed by Eliza, and it's a great privilege. It's a great pleasure. So thank you for talking.
My pleasure. Thank you. Thank you for caring about this, and thank you for getting the word out. I hope we can make a difference.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening to the Real Organic Podcast. Our movement is growing because you're subscribing and sharing these podcasts with your friends. So keep it up and leave us a rating and a review as well so that others can find us. You can find a video version of this interview on our newly designed website, realorganicproject.org, or on our YouTube channel. And you can join us every Thursday for a new episode featuring voices from the organic movement. See you next time.